Do you know who this is? This is Dr. Dana Ferris, and she's amazing. I just shared with her at a TESOL convention. Rod Ellis was speaking as the plenary presenter to thousands of people at the TESOL convention, and he must have said Dana's name like 15 times. So it's just like citing her and citing her and citing her. She's very well known in the TESOL field. She's written, I think, 9 books. I think my bio said 4 books. I just talked to her. I'm like, this doesn't seem updated. She goes, no, it's 9, and that's not counting all the second editions. So she's very well known in the field. Her specialty is of course, writing and reading. If you've taken TESOL 550, she's one of the co-authors of that book, right, with Hedgecock. And she actually has a chapter in my book that I use in the Christianity, the Critical Perspectives of Christianity English Language Teaching course. She's in that book as well. So anyway, we're very, very excited. We've been asking her to do this for like years, and finally she had an opening, and she's here and speaking to us today. So I didn't read a thing from your bio. I'm really sorry. But do they have the bio available? No? So should I like be serious and read it? So she's at UC Davis. She got her PhD at USC. Go Trojans. She worked under Krashen and Kaplan. They were gone by the time I got there. And her specialty is writing. She launched a journal. The journal she launched was called Journal of Response to Writing. Am I right? And she's the co-editor of another journal. Is that with I.C. Lee? Yeah, oh, I thought so, because I knew I.C. Lee was the editor. I'm like, how is she the editor? I.C.'s the editor, but you guys are co-editors. Okay, I get it. So she's co-editing with I.C. Lee, Journal of Second Language Writing. Right, so that's very exciting. She really likes baseball and cooking and traveling. So we don't have that in common. Just the baseball and cooking. All right, anyway, very excited to invite her up here. Her topic is called The Strategic Teacher, Building Student Confidence Through Compassion and Complexity. And with no further ado, please come up and welcome Dana Ferris.
Thank you for that nice intro. I'm really happy to be here. As Mary said, we've been back and forth trying to get me here one of these years, and it's fun to finally be here. It's a nice campus. A young friend of ours from Davis, from our church, came here for school for music some years ago, but I've never been here myself, so it's nice to be here. A little warm down here, I must say. I was just talking to a friend who's like, oh, we're gonna make chili today and watch football because it's fall. I'm like, is it though? Is it really fall? Yeah. So I'm very happy to be here. That's the abstract that I sent for my talk, and I highlighted some things in red and blue, just sort of kind of the outline for where I'm headed. So in this talk, to highlight these themes, I'm going to provide a few specific illustrations from my own program where I work, a few thoughts from Scripture, since this is a friendly audience for that, and some principles from research, both other people's research and my own. And there are going to be a couple of spots where I'm going to ask you, stop briefly and ask you to interact around your tables, around a question. So be ready, because I don't intend to do all the work. All right, you ready? Okay. For me, learning to become a strategic teacher started with a personal exercise some years ago of creating a life mission statement. I don't know if any of you have ever done that or thought about doing that, but through a process of reflection, prayer, and feedback from people who knew me, I articulated my own mission statement thus: to be an equipper and an encourager. At the time, I thought of this mission statement primarily from my own personal life as a wife, a mother, and a church leader. As time went on, I realized that it could and should extend to my professional life as a teacher, researcher, writer, mentor to grad students, and now a program administrator with a lot of oversight responsibilities towards staff and other faculty as well as students. And just a little bit to add to my bio, you saw I'm a professor at UC Davis. I am currently the director of the university writing program, the whole program. So I'm the equivalent of a department chair until I just started that in July. And the previous 5 years before that, I directed our large and rapidly growing program for multilingual writers. For the first few years, we just had the first year incoming students, and the last 2 years, we've also had the graduate students. So working on their reading and writing and language skills in a series of classes, which I'll tell you more about one of them a little bit later. So being strategic about equipping and encouraging, my own life mission statement, has led to identifying some important sub-concepts that you can see here. Oops, went too fast. On the screen. So confidence with compassion, complexity, independence, accountability. Those are things that are all sort of circling around the idea of confidence for me. So before we go any further, and before I tell you what I think about the topic of building confidence through compassion and complexity, I want you to think briefly about your own definitions of these concepts. What did these words, any or all of them, mean to you, particularly as a teacher or any other role that you have? To what extent are these ideas, any or all of these words, a conscious part of your own approach to teaching? There are no right or wrong answers. Just kind of what comes to mind when you think of these words, especially in teaching. So let's take about 4 minutes around the tables to discuss with those around you, just to kind of get the juices flowing, and then I'll jump back in. So go, 4 minutes. Okay, so now that you've thought about some of these concepts a little bit, let's first talk about the notion of confidence. So you can see one definition here, and the derivation, Middle English from Latin, if you like those kinds of word roots, as I do. So the definition here is a feeling of self-assurance arising from one's appreciation of one's own abilities or qualities. And one thing that struck me about this definition is that appreciation here in this dictionary definition implies some self-awareness of one's strengths and abilities, right? You can't have confidence unless you're consciously aware of what it is you're capable of doing. So that's an angle to confidence that I found interesting. I can't think of the word confidence without thinking of Maria. Early in the film, The Sound of Music, the Reverend Mother sends Maria, who's so far not working out very well as a nun, to become the governess for the 7 children of the rich, famous war hero, Captain Von Trapp. So Maria's understandably feeling a bit anxious about this assignment, so she sings and dances to try to perk herself up, as you can see from this photo. Now, earlier this summer, my husband and I went on a trip through Central Europe and got to take a day trip to Salzburg, Austria, where the movie was set and filmed. And the fountain you see in the back of the photo was part of the I Have Confidence scene. Now, Maria was kind of on her own, with her own plucky spirit and her faith in God, but without much training from the Abbey, and certainly without any support from Captain Von Trapp, his household staff, or even the children themselves. And she figured it out. We can, and probably should, do more for our students than simply shoving them out the door and telling them to figure it out, okay? So just about 2 minutes into a little bit of theory behind the notion of confidence and how that fits into our endeavors as teachers. Now, more than 30 years ago, Stephen Krashen, who Mary mentioned was one of my professors at USC, was writing and talking about what he called the affective filter, or the emotional component of learning. If learners are anxious, disengaged, or unmotivated, or lacking in self-confidence, this filter will block language input and inhibit their progress. This is how the theory goes. So turning to my own primary area of interest, writing, psychology researchers began studying what is called writing apprehension, which can affect any student writer, whether they're writing in their first language or an alternate one. Finally, researchers in both second language learning and writing studies have focused on issues of self-efficacy, self-regulation, and agency, all concepts related to students' ability to manage their own learning and development, as well as ways teachers can give students agency, power, and independence, and help them develop effective independent learning strategies. Now, none of these ideas are new. Indeed, they go back 3 to 4 decades. However, in teacher preparation and development, often we focus more on the mechanics and the how-tos, how to pick a textbook, how to design a lesson plan or a syllabus, give corrective feedback, write an assessment, or give grades. That we focus on the hows more than we do the whos. Whom do we want to be as teachers? Who are our students, and where do we want them to go or develop under our guidance? And I apologize for those of you in the back who maybe can't see this as clearly. These are some snapshots from some recent research projects I've done. And just to cut to the chase of these, student confidence or lack thereof has arisen as a repeated theme in studies of first-year and upper division university writers that I've been doing. Now, all of the studies listed here are UC Davis students who'd been admitted to a top-ranked, highly competitive research university. If they feel unsure about themselves, imagine how students in other contexts might feel. Just to give you a couple of examples, and I'll read them to you for those who can't see in the back. So in this project, the most recent project I had on the previous slide, my co-researchers and I analyzed the content of nearly 250 student papers, and there's some pretty negative, despairing terms here. So this is from one. The best words to describe myself as a writer would be reluctant and insecure. I hate writing papers with a passion, and I can never seem to get started, and once I'm done writing, I really don't want anyone to read it. Second one, I am what I would consider a bipolar writer. Sometimes everything comes with extreme ease. I feel inspired and confident, and the resulting work is close to the best quality I'm capable of producing. On the other hand, I've experienced many occurrences of the total opposite, or total lack of inspiration, and a resulting work so hopeless that I am ashamed to even look at it again, let alone edit and attempt to salvage it. There is a humorous lack of middle ground for me. The highs are amazing and the lows are crushing. And for what it's worth, now not all of the papers we analyzed were this negative or despairing, but a lot of them were. It's safe to say that many students lack confidence, especially in their ability to communicate effectively, whether it's in speaking or writing. And for what it's worth, both of these excerpts were written by native speakers, not second language writers. Now, back in 1986, David Esky, who was another of my professors and Mary's, wrote about the confidence gap that inhibits second language readers from using effective reading strategies. My own research and my observations as a teacher and administrator convinces me that the confidence gap continues to be a big issue for language and writing students today as well. So with some of our own ideas that you talked about and a brief dip into theory and research, let's unpack two components of building student confidence: compassion and complexity, or challenge. I'll argue that both are integral to the strategic teacher's goal of developing confident learners, and that the models for these components come not only from academic theory, but from scripture. Are these opposing or contradictory ideas, compassion and complexity, or challenge? Let's see where this takes us. So back to some definitions. The definitions of the word compassion, it literally means to suffer with. And some synonyms are pity, sympathy, empathy, care, concern, tenderness, mercy, leniency, kindness, humanity. Some teachers are already very compassionate. Indeed, these are the personal qualities that may have led them into the profession to begin with. Others may struggle more with compassion. I know I did as a young teacher. I always felt tension between justice, or accountability, and mercy. As Christians, we know that God is both just and merciful. But what does this mean for our relationships with our students? Justice might say, for example, I told you really clearly what the due date was and what the consequences would be for late papers. Part of my job is teaching you how to accept responsibility for your choices. Mercy might say, I can see that you've been struggling with illness, with time management, with a difficult marriage, or with a child in trouble. So I'm going to give you some extra time to get things together. We all make bad choices, and life happens to all of us. Don't we all need a second chance, a do-over sometimes? So as I think about this tension more and more, I believe that compassion and mercy are very, very high values for a Christian teacher. In his letter to Christians, James says, judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. That's James chapter 2, verse 13. So I have to ask myself, when I go to work, when I'm in my classroom or my office hours or responding to student emails, do I look on each student with compassion? Or do I respond to them sometimes with irritation or even with judgment? There are some good scriptural models on compassion. I'm not going to read all the verses to you, just to hit 3 points. Scripture clearly shows us that God treats us with compassion, that Jesus as a person walking the earth showed compassion and empathy, and that Christians are to be compassionate people. And we really like the verse about God's mercies being new every morning. And so sometimes I have to remind myself, are my mercies towards the people I interact with, are they new every morning as well? Okay, so let's discuss, and again, we're a little shorter on time than I thought, so let's take just 3 minutes this time. What might it look like? I'm going to give you some specific ideas of my own about how to live out being a compassionate teacher. But again, I want you to talk to each other about that just for a couple minutes. What might it look like to be a compassionate teacher, and what questions, if any, does this word raise for you as a teacher? Any of the tensions I mentioned. So 3 minutes, go. I have a few thoughts in practical terms about what it might look like to be a compassionate teacher. More principles than specifics, but because we all come from different places and have different situations. So the first one here is know your students and give them the benefit of the doubt. And sort of a corollary to that I'd add is don't get cynical about students. I read something on Twitter recently where we all know, any teacher knows, especially teachers of college students know it's almost become a joke about, how many times is a student's grandmother going to die, in a term. And I actually read something that said, we shouldn't be questioning students' truthfulness. What is the what's the stance you're taking with students to begin with if your kind of default assumption is they're lying to you, right? And I know at points I've been teaching a long time, and at points in my teaching, I've gotten a little cynical about this. I assume that students are going to lie to me. I assume that students are going to try to get out of work or try to get out of deadlines. And, I think it's good to be wise about this, but I don't know that should be our starting point. I remember when I was a very young teacher, still in my MA program, I was a TA teaching an ESL writing class for the first time. One of my older, wiser colleagues told me, you have to run a really tight ship in the classroom. They will walk all over you if you don't just smack them down. I remember thinking, yeah, that doesn't sound right to me. And it was interesting, as part of my TA-ship, we had a thing where I went and observed her class and she came and observed mine. She had all kinds of discipline problems in her classroom. And she was teaching the same level, same kind of students I was. I didn't have those problems. I thought, when you treat students with mistrust and disrespect, they'll kind of give you what you expect of them. Students, and I don't care what age they are, students know if teachers don't respect them and don't enjoy them. So don't get cynical. The second one is to consider whether your course design, especially assignments and grading, is compassionate. So non-compassionate practices could include things like pop quizzes, which can be you didn't do the homework, so I'm gonna check out if you did the homework by giving you a surprise quiz, which is kind of adversarial and stress producing, homework or classwork that's designed as punishment. Excessive workload and too much of the grade depended on high-stress assessments such as tests. Just for example, and again, it'll vary according to different contexts. Number 4 is consider whether your interactions with students are compassionate. And I would just say about this that compassionate teachers should never, ever, 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 ever be snappish and mean with students. No matter how annoyed, and maybe justifiably annoyed, they may feel. I always said in my own teacher training years, if you're annoyed with your students, go home and tell your roommate or your significant other or your partner. Do not take it out on the students, Somebody has to be the adult and the professional, right? And that goes for in-class interactions, emails, and written feedback on student work. One of my areas of research over the years has been teachers' written responses to student writing, and I've looked at a lot of samples and I've talked to a lot of teachers over the years, and I am often shocked at just the flat-out meanness that teachers can demonstrate when they're giving written feedback on student papers. And I just think there's no excuse for it, and it should never be part of our toolbox if we're compassionate teachers. I came across an example, and I know you're not going to be able to read this, so I'm just going to tell you about it. I came across this on Twitter recently as an example of compassionate policy making. And what this is on a course syllabus in a college class, and it's a policy on children in class, bringing your child to class. And in this syllabus excerpt, the instructor transparently communicates a compassionate stance and policy towards students' poor appearance. And one of my favorite parts of it, it says, this is my favorite part, I ask that all students work with me to create a welcoming environment that is respectful of all forms of diversity, including diversity in parenting status. I thought, what an interesting way to put that. I had never thought to put this kind of thing in a syllabus, and in my current context where I tend to work in students of traditional college age, it's probably not necessary, but there might be other policy statements one could make to meet students where they are. And reading this on Twitter reminded me of an experience many years ago in a different institution where I did tend to have students who were parents, and occasionally their child care arrangements would fall apart and they'd bring a child to class. And I had a student in this one class who I'd had her in a class before, so I knew her, and she showed up the first day of fall semester, 9 months pregnant. And I said, well, Michelle, how's this gonna work? And she said, well, this is my last semester before I graduate. I really want to finish. I'm hoping I'm going to have the baby. I'm planning to be out a week. I'm hoping you'll allow me to bring the newborn to class and she explained that the father of her child had left her during the pregnancy, so she's a single mom. And those of you who are parents, finding childcare for newborns is practically impossible. And I said, well, as long as you take him out, if he fusses, I guess that'd be all right. And so she did. She was out 1 week, came back with the baby. He was darling, and my class seemed to fall in his regular nap time, so it actually worked out pretty well. But there was one day where the students were taking a quiz, and the baby started to fuss during the quiz. And I thought, well, what are we going to do here? We can't have a baby crying during the quiz. And mom needs to take the quiz too. So I said, give him here. And I went outside the classroom and walked him up and down the halls while the students took the quiz, because I'm a mom, I know how to walk a fussy baby. And I hadn't really thought of that as being a compassionate approach to teaching. It was just kind of an in-the-moment thing. And she went on to graduate and go on to get her teaching credential and become a teacher. And I knew that degree was going to mean a lot to her and her 2 little boys, especially as a single mom. So this whole idea, though, of having compassionate policies like written into a syllabus is a challenging idea for me. The policies in my own syllabi tend to be more laying down the law. Don't be late. Don't leave early. Don't use electronics in a distracting way. And pretty much every policy in my syllabus is because of something bad that happened in the past, right? That I went ahead off in the... So the idea of how can I display compassion and how I design the course and communicate it? That's a new one to me. All right. So moving on from compassion, let's talk about complexity or challenge. And I want to address two questions. How does adding complexity or challenging students build their confidence? And is challenging students at odds with what I just said about being compassionate towards them? All right. Again, we go to Scripture. There are scriptural models of God challenging people out of their comfort zones, Jesus challenging people not only to turn away from lives of sin, but to sacrificially follow him, and Christians being challenged to go deeper and become more mature and to take risks for their own faith. So I think we're on scripturally solid ground with both compassion and with challenge. What might be some practical ways to challenge students? So one is to ask students to set goals for themselves, and I'm going to show you an example in a minute. Give them choices, give them opportunities to try new things, build complexity as the course moves along. Don't just stay in the same place you started, and ask students to reflect upon their own efforts and progress. And this little graphic here is what I just said, but in kind of a graphic form, the cycle of self-regulated learning, where students are involved in their own learning. So this is a first week goal setting activity. So this is one example of reflective goal setting that we used in the program that I directed for the past 5 years. In the first and last week of the term, students took online grammar and vocabulary tests and did in-class self-editing of texts they had written, specifically as a way to show them in concrete, measurable terms what they were strong at and where they might still need work. After completing these activities, they did brief reflective writing and goal setting. So this is the week 1 writing task. And then in week 10, they were asked to go back to what they'd said the first week and think about and write about how they'd done, and then set some goals for the future, reminding them that their development didn't begin and end with this class. Another strategy that I mentioned for challenging students is to build increasing complexity into the tasks they do as the course goes along. So I'm going to show you one example from the same program. This was the mid-level course of 3, and this was still 3 levels below the regular first-year college composition. So these are not super advanced students. These are first-year university students. This is an overview of the writing tasks. And so the course theme was generations, and specifically the difference between millennials and their baby boomer or Gen X parents. And all of the different subtopics were related to that. So the writing tasks moved from fairly simple ones, like responding personally to prompts on generational differences, to more challenging ones, like summarizing lengthy and difficult readings, to very complex multi-stage tasks, as in major assignment 2. Now in this major assignment, they had to choose and narrow a subtopic about millennials in education, find published sources about it, engage in primary data collection through observations and interviews and writing them up, and then finally learning about and producing for what was for most was a new genre, the open letter, the researched open letter. They're used to writing 5 paragraphs essays. They didn't know what an open letter was. We had to teach them what that was about. This assignment was very challenging and lasted 4 weeks of the 10-week course. Students did a lot of work at the different stages. The interesting thing was not only that they did some excellent work and they were able to do it, but that they loved it. They loved the choices they had, they loved getting to feel like primary researchers, and they loved the challenge of trying a new authentic genre and not just the 5-paragraph essay they'd been drilled in for college admissions exams. Now, just really quickly, this is an overview of the course reader that supported these writing tasks. And we had everything from light little first-person newspaper articles to blog posts to research reports to The Economist, just a very very diverse group of texts, and the grade level equivalencies, they went from 6th grade to 13th grade to everything in between. So in this course, building the challenge and the complexity in the reading and writing tasks also clearly built their confidence and their motivation. All right. So to put all this together, I'm going to skip the discussion activity. You can talk about it over dessert later. But just to tie this together, building student confidence. First of all, compassionate teachers convey through course design, interaction, policy, and grace that they have the students' welfare at heart. This builds trust that helps students engage with instruction and in feedback, even when it's challenging. Complex teaching conveys to students your confidence in them, that you believe they can handle challenging tasks with your framing, scaffolding, and assistance. Just an aside about that, when one of my daughters was in 3rd grade, I would try to volunteer in the classroom as my schedule allowed, and the 3rd grade teacher had them do reading groups, literature circles, where the groups would have a book, a novel, and every couple of weeks the groups would meet and discuss what they'd been reading. The interesting part, and the parents would sit in on the groups and just make sure they ran smoothly. The interesting thing about this was that the students wrote the discussion questions for the literature circle groups. And they did a great job. I wouldn't have thought 3rd grade, I would have thought the parents or the teacher would have to write the discussion questions. These were 3rd graders. And I remember thinking, I'm underestimating what kids can do if you take the time to break something down and show them how to do it. And I think that's true for everybody. And then finally, challenging and novel tasks, something that's new that they haven't gotten to do before, build confidence because they're interesting and they provide a sense of self-efficacy. I can do more things or harder things than I realized. I remember being a college student taking French and being assigned to read a novel in French, and there was no way I thought I could do that. But the teacher broke it down for us, and I could do it, and that made me feel a lot more confident about my ability to cope with French. So, in short, neither the content, what topics students write or talk or write about, or even the specific language learning tasks themselves are as important as what the students learn about themselves and how that awareness may help them in approaching future communication opportunities. The keys to building student morale are understanding and empathizing with the challenges multilingual students face and developing positive and strategic approaches to helping them succeed. Being a strategic teacher takes time, research skills, by which I mean learning about your students, and thoughtfulness. It also involves some flexibility and willingness to adjust one's preferences and prior experiences to a new situation. However, the alternative to doing all of that is to teach a class haphazardly and with poor results. Or as the saying goes, aim at nothing and you're sure to hit it. The challenges multilingual students face are daunting when one stops to consider them, but a thoughtful and carefully designed approach to their language development will go a long way towards equipping students for short and long-term success. So in the end, it turns out that being a strategic teacher is pretty much what it's always been. There's no shortcut for teachers for thoughtfulness, intensive preparation, empathy and compassion for students, and reflection upon what has gone well or not. So it's not complicated, but it's also not easy. Thank you.